Redditors who have a job where they go into other people's homes, plumbers, electricians, etc. What's the weirdest, most disturbing thing you've seen while working in a customer's house? I'm a face painter who mainly works at kids' birthday parties. Most gigs are pretty straightforward. Sometimes the houses are a little run down, but the kids always have a blast, so no complaints. One time, I showed up at this house that was a bit messy and had a noticeable odor, but I didn't think much of it. As I was setting up my paints and brushes, I suddenly heard a strange little peep sound coming from above. Curious, I looked up and saw a guinea pig scurrying through a clear plastic tube attached to the ceiling. I glanced around and realized the entire house was covered in a complicated network of these plastic tubes. That's when the mom casually mentioned, "Oh, we have like 10 guinea pigs." I used to deliver oxygen equipment to people's homes and saw all kinds of strange situations. There were plenty of hoarders, but this one guy definitely took the cake. He was really hesitant to let me in at first because his place was a total mess. He kept apologizing and warning me about the state of his house. Turns out, messy was an understatement. The guy had 200 chickens roaming around inside his home. He was actually proud of his show chickens and refused to keep them in a barn or a coop like normal people. The smell was absolutely brutal, but other than that, he was a genuinely nice guy. I deliver food from a food bank to homebound seniors, usually filling 2 banana boxes about 1.5 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 1 foot deep, with all kinds of groceries. There's one guy I've been delivering to for 3 years now. One day, he hurt his foot, and I had to come inside to help. That's when I noticed something wild. He'd never thrown away a single box. They lined every wall and doorway like some kind of fortress. Around his bed, he'd built a full-on castle made of boxes, with winding paths throughout the house. It reminded me of those pillow forts we made as kids, only on a much bigger scale. I asked if he wanted help clearing them out, but he just laughed and said no. He said it was fun and helped with his sense of dimension. Honestly, he's a really fun guy. I'm an electrician, and one time I was troubleshooting a faulty outlet in the bathroom of a former NFL player. I was busy taking all the outlets apart, trying to trace the wiring, basically chasing the home runs when he walks in and starts chatting football like we're old buddies. We're mid-conversation when, out of nowhere, he just walks over to the toilet and starts doing his business. There was only a short pony wall between us, so I couldn't see him, but he didn't even pause his story. The whole thing was so surreal. Honestly, I had to step out because the smell was brutal. A little while later, he comes out like nothing happened, and we just picked up right where we left off. Definitely one of the strangest work moments I've had. I delivered pizza for about 2 years and ended up at a local motel quite a bit. One day, I knock on a door, and it's opened by this towering woman, like 6 feet tall, around 220 pounds, decked out head to toe in full dominatrix gear. She looked like she was ready to get down to business, but the moment she saw me, she quickly shut the door and threw on a robe. She apologized profusely for the mix-up and then handed me a $10 tip for the awkward situation. Edit. I've seen a few questions about this. Yeah, I could have gone inside, but when you're 16, you don't handle those moments as smoothly as you think you would. Plus, she probably took one look at my baby face and figured I was way too young for her. No surprise there, I look like I'm 20, and I'm almost 30 now. A while back, I worked doing estimates for fire and water damage repairs at a restoration company. I visited a couple who'd had a small fire in their bedroom. When I first walked in, everything looked pretty normal, just that lingering, smoky smell, which made sense given the fire. They showed me the bedroom, where the mattress had taken the brunt of the damage. There was some charring on the wall above the bed's headboard and smoke damage on the ceiling. But what really blew me away was what was sitting on each side of the bed. 10-gallon buckets filled to the brim with cigarette butts, and hundreds more scattered all over the floor. I couldn't wrap my head around how they could live like that in their bedroom, especially since the rest of the house was surprisingly tidy and normal. Plus, I couldn't understand why they wouldn't clean that mess up after the fire, if only so the insurance adjusters wouldn't easily pin the blame on them and maybe deny the claim. I asked the husband, because it's part of the job, how did the fire start? His answer? No idea. My boyfriend is a locksmith. Back in the 2008 recession, Las Vegas was flooded with homes being repossessed or abandoned. The company he worked for had him changing locks on these properties, usually late at night, to avoid any awkward run-ins with former owners. I sometimes tag along, mostly because I loved exploring those massive, empty houses, but I'd help out when I could. One night, we arrived at a house that looked totally normal from the outside, just another cookie-cutter home in a planned development. But inside, every single room was filled with what looked like timeout dolls. If you've never seen them, these dolls stand against the wall with their hands covering their faces, creepy enough on their own, but these ones usually had no faces at all. They looked like kids sulking after being put in timeout. And I'm not exaggerating, they were in every single room. Not just a couple here and there, but dozens, all standing upright against the walls. The electricity was off, so all we had were flashlights. Walking from room to room, the eerie feeling just kept building, with doll after doll staring, or rather, hiding in the shadows. My boyfriend's already terrified of dolls, so this made it way worse. Between us, we counted 63, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more hiding somewhere. My uncle is a handyman, and one time he went to do some work for a family where the bathroom situation was pretty gross. The toilet wasn't just unflushed, it was completely packed with hardened feces. Like, nobody had flushed for who knows how long, and the bowl was totally crammed full. It was clear this wasn't a one-time thing. It had been building up for quite a while. Disturbing? Not at all. Weird? Definitely. I worked as a medical equipment delivery guy for a couple of years. One day, I went to a dementia patient's house to show his caretaker how to set up a large oxygen tank. As I was kneeling down, my phone buzzed quietly with my subtle notification tone, a single beep. Right then, a nearby pet bird perfectly mimicked the beep, matching the exact tone and volume. The caretaker and I exchanged surprised looks, and she said, "I've been here 6 years, and he's never done that before." After that, every time I came to deliver equipment and knelt down to re-explain the setup, standard procedure, the bird would instinctively ping right along with my phone. Once I let my notification sound go off, the bird would celebrate by bobbing his head and spinning in a little circle. It became our little ritual. I used to work in pest control and once went into a student accommodation to deal with some kind of insect. Can't quite remember if it was carpet moths or bed bugs. Honestly, that part's not the point. There's this one room that was pretty clean, but because of the pest, we had to spray all fabrics with chemicals to make sure no eggs could survive. So suitcases, wardrobes, all that stuff had to be opened up. Then I came across a suitcase filled with used tampons. Yep, just sitting there, save for some mystery reason that I definitely didn't want to find out. I didn't say a word, finished the job, and made a point to avoid eye contact when I left. Definitely one of the nastier surprises I've stumbled on. A few years ago, when I was working as an electrician, I made a grim discovery. I found a man with a rifle next to him. He'd tried to shoot himself through the mouth. He'd missed the vital parts, but his bed was covered in brain matter and blood. He was still breathing, though in a comatose state. I later heard he died that day. I worked in apartment maintenance for a while. During our quarterly inspections, on the very first day, we opened a door and were hit with a smell that's hard to put into words. The guy I was with, an ex-military veteran, looked at me and said, "We're about to find a body." In maintenance work, it's not a question of if you'll find a body, it's when. He told me he'd go in alone if I felt uncomfortable, but I went in with him anyway. We didn't find a body. What we found was a massive mountain of trash filling the entire dining area. Mostly food packaging, plus garbage scattered everywhere, which explained a lot of the smell. But the real surprise was a dog. A sweet golden retriever, starving for attention. It was clear the poor dog had been left to pee and poop all over the place, probably not taken outside for weeks judging by the smell and the state of the unit. We went outside, locked up, and called the property manager to come by. While we were waiting, the tenant came home. The look on his face when he saw us was terrifying. The manager talked to him, and they worked out a plan for cleanup with a deadline to get the unit back to a livable condition. The other maintenance guy stayed with the tenant for a while that evening. When we left, he was convinced the tenant might take his own life that night. Turns out, the renter had recently gone through a brutal divorce where his kids were taken away with almost no warning, and he was spiraling. I left the company before knowing how it all ended. I hope he found some peace. I used to do flooring work, and one time we had to remove the subfloor because of water damage. Underneath, we found a black garbage bag. When I opened it, it was filled with women's clothes. At first, I didn't think much of it, until we dumped it out and saw bloody, ripped underwear and torn dresses. I told the homeowner that we had forgotten some tools at the shop and wouldn't be back until the next day. Then I called the police and never returned to that house. Not long after, the place was put up for sale. I just saw a post on another subreddit about a girl with social anxiety who hid under her bed when the plumbers showed up. The plumbers actually found her hiding there. After that, she ran and locked herself in the bathroom until they left. Now I'm really curious. Are those plumbers on Reddit? I'd love to hear their side of the story. 1. We got a service call to an older house in Inglewood, California, probably built in the 50s. The moment we arrived, we were hit with a smell that's hard to describe. Imagine a monster made of diarrhea, baked in the desert sun for weeks. I immediately shoved Vicks Vapor Rub up my nose. We knocked, and a yell from inside told us to enter. The second the door opened, a wave of stench so foul it would offend a porta potty slammed into us. Pushing through it, we stepped into what could only be described as a neckbeard museum. Piles upon piles of pizza boxes, mountains of diet soda cans, and jars of what I can only assume was piss were sprinkled throughout the house. The carpet squished under our feet as we navigated to the hallway. The owner of this hentai hideaway finally appeared. His shirt, once white, was now a mix of colors and stains from time and gluttony. His shorts looked stiff to the touch. I assumed he'd been using them to masturbate. His greasy black hair and scraggly beard adorned his skinny face. He told us his water had been off for 8 months, but he'd finally paid the bill and wanted us to ensure his shower and toilet were working. I already knew what was coming. A picture formed in my mind of the horror awaiting us in the bathroom. We walked over, opened the door, and my eyes, my innocent, virgin eyes, beheld a sight I will never forget. This bathroom was a war crime. The United Nations would sanction it if they knew it existed. Nations would weep at its sight and smell. Terrorist organizations would consider it cruel. Guantanamo Bay was a 5-star resort compared to this sin against nature. Every surface, the toilet, the sink, the bathtub, the floor, the walls, the ceiling was covered in a thick layer of human shit and piss and paper. I've literally swum in human waste before in a hazmat suit, but this was a declaration of war on humanity. A crime against God and man. A holy war, the 7th seal opening, revealing the face of death itself. I turned to my dad and simply said no. He looked at me with a face that held a mixture of fear, pain, sadness, and rage. Then, he turned to the owner of this hate crime and said, My God have mercy on you. Good luck. We walked out to our truck and never spoke of that day again, the darkest day humanity has ever faced. But we saved you all. Unleashing that plague into the world was something we could never live with. 2. Crawling under houses can be the best and worst part of a plumber's job. Sure, it's cold, dark, and no one will bother you. But sometimes it's extremely tight, and moving around can make you freak out if you don't know how to calm yourself. And sometimes you see things you never wanted to see. I've crawled into all sorts of horrors with my dad. Possums, wasp nests, shit, blood piss, dead animals. But nothing compares to the time I solo crawled under a house and found myself in a scene straight out of arachnophobia. It was a hot summer day in Los Angeles. I put on my crawl suit and grabbed my tool tray, filled with pliers, screwdrivers, a pipe cutter, blowtorch, and other tools. I began shoving my large body into a hole not made for me. I wormed my way in feet first, finally slipping into the sweet, cool darkness. My dad handed me the crawl light, and I took a look around. I had about 5 inches of space between me and the floor above. The ground was dry and cool. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary and began to shimmy my massive frame as fast as I could toward the pipe I needed to work on. I reached the pipe and started looking for a leak. Have you ever walked through a spider web and felt like you had spiders all over you but didn't? I felt that as I rolled over, trying to check the pipe. I thought nothing of it. I was under a house in the spider realm. It happens. I started digging through my tool tray for some soap to test the pipe. The crawly feeling on my skin intensified. I grabbed my crawl light and brought it closer. That's when I saw them, thousands upon thousands of them. A literal wave of baby black widows washing over my legs. Normally, I'm not scared of spiders, but being covered in baby black widows invoked a fear unlike anything I've ever felt. I screamed. I screamed like a 10-year-old girl. I started thrashing my body all over the ground, try to get them off me, my legs and hands slamming into the ceiling. I went into a trance, the walls closing in. The spiders crawling all over me, coupled with the tight space, made me hyperventilate and panic. I moved faster than I've ever moved before, crawling like a baby on speed toward the entrance. I could still feel them all over me, inside my crawl suit, trying to find my soft flesh. The light at the entrance, about 20 feet away, looked like the tunnel people see when they die. I began to feel small pricks on my hands and neck. I finally reached the crawl space hole and felt my dad's iron grip on my shirt. He summoned all his dad powers to yank me out of the hole and toss me onto the ground. I rolled around, swearing and yelling, trying to get the 8-legged assholes off me, when I heard my dad shout, "Stop moving!" I finally looked up to see him standing over me with the fire extinguisher from our truck. He said, "Close your eyes and mouth," and then blasted me with it. I stood up and looked down to see hundreds of little spiders freaking the hell out from the fire extinguisher chemicals. I peeled off the crawl suit and inspected myself. All in all, I only had 4 bites. I'm not allergic to black widow venom, but man, did they hurt. We never finished that job. The owner refused to pay for pest control. 3. You ever have one of those days where nothing goes your way? This was one of those days. I wasn't even supposed to be working with my dad, but I got a call around 9 a.m. that he needed help with a job and would pick me up in 30 minutes. We arrived at some cross-section of streets in one of LA's many ghetto areas. I saw city trucks and workers huddled around a sewage access panel. My first thought was, this is strange. Why is the city here? We exited the truck, walked over to the group, and that's when the smell hit me. My feeble vocabulary can't begin to describe the foul stench wafting from that hole in the ground. It was like an atom bomb made of hot, all-you-can-eat Indian food diarrhea dropped on a city made of week-old animal carcasses, dipped in a volcano's asshole. It smelled so bad that I was physically assaulted by it. Like Mike Tyson had covered his hands in Michael Moore's shit to add poison damage to his strikes. Like a sentient poo monster had declared war on my very being. It smelled like someone who should be dead had violently shat in a Sears dishwasher and hit steam. It smelled like the Civil War had sex with the Vietnam War and had a baby that was a gangrenous, pus-filled, maggot-ridden dumpster full of dead skunks and a summer fart monster. We approached the city workers, and my dad filled me in. Apparently, a blockage was causing all the sewage from the surrounding 4 blocks to back up into this access point. The city workers had flat out refused to go down there, so they contracted my dad's company to clear the blockage. I wasn't sure what the process involved. I was 18, and I had no idea what was going on. All I knew was my dad, his boss, and his boss's boss were all there. My dad said we were going to dive into this shit lake and remove the blockage before it started spilling into the street. I thought, well, at least I'll get paid more. So we went to the head boss's van to get our suits on. This took about 20 minutes, but I was covered head to toe in duct-taped hazmat gear. We waddled over to the entrance of hell and began crawling down the ladder. For what I remember, it was a strange feeling like floating in water without it touching you. If that water was human shit and piss, and you bumped into chunks of paper, tampons, and other nasty stuff. At this point, I was 200% done with the entire day. I was just floating at the surface, holding the lead to my dad's wire. I felt a tug, meaning he was ready to come back up. His head broke the surface of the liquid shit, and he yelled, "Tree down there." Trees don't just appear in sewage lines. Apparently, a tree's roots had grown so massive and tangled that paper products had formed a sort of seal on all the loose spots, blocking all the wastewater. We'd done all we could and emerged from the new public pool. We got to a hazmat shower tent and were sprayed down for what seemed like hours. Big old scrub brushes with nasty chemicals scraped our clothes and skin. My dad's boss handed him a check for some absurd amount of money, and we got in the truck and left. That was the last time my dad ever worked for or with the city. That was the last time I'd ever dive into shit. There's not enough money in the world for me to do that again. I used to be a firefighter. One night, we got a call to check on an elderly lady in a mobile home. When we walked in, it was pretty dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something strange, what looked like weird wallpaper. Then I realized it wasn't wallpaper at all. As I looked around, I saw the same odd patterns and rectangular shapes on the ceiling too. The more my eyes adjusted, the more I realized, wait, are those puzzles? Turns out, she had hundreds of completed puzzles glued together and stuck to every surface in her home. Walls, ceiling, living room, bedroom, every inch covered in puzzle pieces. Definitely unusual, but hey, if that's what makes her happy in her own space, more power to her. Honestly, it wasn't nearly as strange as some of the stuff I've seen on here. I used to be a paramedic in Oakland. One time, we responded to a call where a child had been bitten by a rat while in her crib. As we were talking to the mother about treatment options, a rat suddenly scurried up and bit one of the firefighters' boots. The firefighter didn't hesitate. He stomped the rat to death right there. They took the rat to the health department for testing afterward. Definitely one of the stranger calls I've been on. I work in lead abatement for a city/county program that provides free or heavily subsidized work, mostly to low-income families. During the abatement, residents have to leave their homes for 1 to 2 weeks while we do the work. A lot of people leave behind a ton of food. One lady was going to be out for 2.5 weeks and left a whole raw turkey just sitting on her counter. By day 4, it was stinking up the place and attracting flies and bugs, so we threw it out. When she came by a week later to retrieve it, she got furious. The city ended up buying her a new turkey that evening. Another family left about 10 pounds of raw chicken laid directly on their stove, no bag, no pan. That got tossed too. One recent case involved a house with 3 Nepali families, around 15 to 20 people living together. Besides human feces in the basement and a dead chicken, they had a small coop down there. The place was infested with roaches. Dozens would fall out every time you opened a cupboard. It was absolutely disgusting. And there was a terrible situation with a guy who locked his dog in the basement for days at a time. The floor was covered in hundreds of piles of dog feces and puddles of urine. He knowingly left the dog there while he was gone for at least 2 weeks. A neighbor eventually rescued the dog and gave it to their daughter, who cared for it. When we cleaned the basement before painting, we had to spray Febreze inside our masks just to avoid vomiting. A sadder case involved a very elderly woman in her late 90s who needed daily help just to get around, but her kids refused to assist. There was a hole in her living room ceiling, right next to the toilet, leading down to the bathroom below. The toilet was improperly installed with no seal, so every flush splashed dirty, urine-filled water downstairs. They had taped a red Solo cup to the leaking pipe to catch the mess. Now, for the frustrating part. This program is for families with children under 8 because lead exposure is linked to developmental disorders like autism. To qualify, residents have to prove that a child lives in the home at least 4 days a week. Unfortunately, many people abuse this rule, claiming they watch nieces or nephews to get the work done, potentially taking resources away from families with children actually at risk. One slumlord, who rented to the dog owner I mentioned, exploited the system to get 8 houses done for free or nearly free, work worth around $200,000. Some even went so far as to collect lead paint chips from other homes and place them around their own windows to trick the tests. When I delivered pizza, I'd often go inside for older customers who were handicapped or just didn't have the strength to carry their food in themselves. One time, I showed up at this lady's house and she was absolutely covered head to toe in cat hair. The whole place smelled so bad, I had to hold my breath just walking through the door. One visit, I noticed something on her kitchen table that completely stopped me in my tracks. A paper plate piled high with what looked like teeth. And I mean a lot of them, all different colors and shapes. It was seriously horrifying and beyond gross. I don't know whose teeth they were, but from what I could tell, she had most of them herself. I never heard any updates about her afterward, so I'm guessing she either moved or something else happened. But man, I'll never forget that smell or that plate of teeth. Ugh. Back in high school, I worked as a delivery boy, and sometimes I'd deliver to a couple of people who genuinely freaked me out. The first was an incredibly large man suffering from elephantiasis. It was hard to believe in God after seeing something like that, and the smell was overwhelming. I don't think he bathed very often, if ever. It was really sad. The second guy, I believe, had HIV or AIDS back before effective treatments were available. His body was covered with what looked like hundreds, maybe even 1,000 injection marks. He lived alone in a small mobile home with metal stairs leading up to the door, and by the time I got to the first step, the smell was already hitting me. Both of these men lived really tough, lonely lives. The second guy would often tip me with wet, crumpled bills that carried his scent, something I never forgot. I'm a journeyman house painter and have been self-employed for over 20 years now. About a decade ago, I was hired to paint the home of an elderly woman, probably around 75 years old. I was working in her kitchen and the small adjoining family dining area. Everything was prepped perfectly. Furniture moved, carpets pulled up, pictures off the walls. The place was ready for paint. I always start by removing the faceplates from outlets and switches, and the first one I pulled off revealed something shocking. The outlet was completely packed with termites. Dead ones, thankfully, but still, This was a clear sign of a much bigger problem. I showed her, and she immediately called her contact over at ABC Pest Company. The pest expert arrived quickly after I explained the situation. I went into standby mode. I wasn't about to start painting a house that might collapse on me. Luckily, she had already bought the paint and was paying me by the hour. The job was supposed to take around 5 hours, about $125. The pest guy inspected the whole house, pulling off a few more outlet covers with the same horrifying results: termite packed and dead inside. Then he suited up in full coveralls and crawled under the house. After just a few minutes, he came out and dropped the bomb. The house was a total loss. The floorboards were barely holding on, walls were soft and ready to give way, and the entire structure could collapse at any moment. I packed up my tools, said my goodbyes, and told her not to worry about paying me. I'd only been there about an hour, and she had way bigger problems to handle. I used to help handle dispatch calls at an ISP. One day, I got a call from this tech who was always a blast to talk to, super laid back, always joking around on the phone for a few minutes before getting down to business. But this one time, he called in sounding totally serious. Here's how it went down. Meh, Jill, what's crack-a-lackin'? Tech, hey, just wanted to formally let dispatch know I'm leaving a job early and unfinished. That immediately got me worried. This guy never did anything formal like that. Me? Okay, pulling up the account now. What's going on? Tech, there are chickens everywhere. Chicken crap covering everything. The crap actually fried the POE. Told the customer this would be a charge call, and they tried to get their chickens to attack me. I jotted down the notes and fired off an email to management. The tech had been threatened and needed to bail to his next job. Apparently, chicken people had a reputation around here, but no one had flagged this account, so we had no clue what the tech was walking into. I don't remember if the company shut down the account or if the crazy chicken people did, but for weeks after, they called every day complaining about how unprofessional the tech was and how terrible we were as a company. I once helped renovate this old building that used to be a house, but had been converted into a business. By the time my employer bought it, the place was seriously run down. We ended up doing tons of work, tearing out subflooring, ripping down ceilings, the whole 9 yards. During the demolition, we discovered a hidden cellar tucked away in the back suite, probably what had once been the kitchen or mudroom. The cellar was packed with all kinds of trash and random odds and ends, including old GI water ration can stamped 1956. Definitely a blast from the past. But the strangest thing was in the middle suite. As we tore down the ceiling, we kept finding spoons, just random spoons stuck up there. It didn't make sense at first, but eventually we pieced it together. Apparently, the local junkie had been using the ceiling as a spot to ditch their spoons. Super weird, but definitely a story that stuck with me. I'm currently training to become a residential property appraiser in Miami, Florida. The guy I work for handles everything from multi-million-dollar mansions to foreclosures. Quite the range. One of the golden rules in this line of work: never open the fridge in a foreclosure. It's not 2007 anymore, so most foreclosures we come across these days belong to elderly folks who have no family support and can no longer care for themselves or their homes. It's incredibly sad to witness. The worst case I've seen so far involved a hoarder clearly dealing with some mental health issues. We were there to appraise the property for a refinance. The smell inside was overwhelming, and we couldn't even access half the rooms because they were either boarded up or packed wall to wall. We had a bunch of dogs too, which only added to the chaos. The man seemed genuinely confused about why we were there and mentioned that his bank guy told him the appraisal fee would be about 3 times our usual rate. It raised red flags immediately. We ended up telling the bank, in a careful, roundabout way, that it seemed like this guy was being taken advantage of. The appraisal was canceled, so we didn't get paid, but my boss and I agreed. Taking a financial hit was worth it to avoid contributing to something shady. Some things just aren't worth the karma. I used to do desktop support for a medical imaging company. Most of the transcriptionists work from home, so I'd often be dispatched to their residences to troubleshoot issues with their desktop computers. One day, a woman called the help desk because her computer was making strange noises and had a burning smell. I was sent to her house to check it out. When I arrived, it was immediately clear the place was in serious disarray. Let's just say it was far from tidy. I cautiously stepped into her home office, which was cluttered with dirty dishes, old takeout containers, and stacks of pizza boxes. I found her desktop under the desk, surrounded by the mess, and bent down to unplug it. As I opened the case to inspect the issue, I was hit with a nightmare. Cockroaches exploded out of the machine. Not just a few, I'm talking hundreds. A full-blown infestation was living inside the computer. One even started crawling up my pant leg. I jumped back in pure panic, trying to flick it off as more poured out of the desktop like a horror movie. I immediately exited the house and called my supervisor, telling him I was not going back inside. I was completely grossed out. When I got to my car, I stripped down right there in the driveway. Yes, fully naked, and threw my contaminated clothes in the trunk. I drove straight home, went into my backyard, threw the clothes and my shoes into the garbage, hosed myself off, and took the hottest shower I've ever had in my life. The next day, my boss tried to write me up for not returning to the office after the incident. I requested an HR rep to be present, and when I explained what had happened, the HR rep advised him to drop it. They made it clear that given the health risks, I would probably have grounds for legal action if they pursued disciplinary measures. I quit a month later. Still one of the most disturbing work experiences I've ever had. I used to conduct crisis mental health assessments to determine whether someone needed to be involuntarily hospitalized for their safety or the safety of others. One case that stuck with me involved a man who was deeply paranoid. He believed his bathroom was contaminated and that black tar, caused by cigarette smoke, would rain down on him if he stepped inside. As a result, he hadn't used the bathroom properly in months. He was relieving himself in buckets and hadn't showered in just as long. When we entered his bedroom, we found several of those buckets, along with something else, at least 200 empty cartons of goat milk. Apparently, that was all he felt safe consuming. There wasn't much debate on this one. We got him to the hospital for treatment. In high school, I had a summer job cleaning out houses owned by banks, foreclosures, or homes where the owner had died without heirs. Usually, it was just old furniture and clothes. But one house. The moment we opened the door, it reeked of pure shit and rot. Normally, That kind of smell meant a fridge had been unplugged and never cleaned, but this was far, far worse. Throughout the house, there were about 25 dead cats, all in different stages of decay, some covered in maggots, others in ants. They'd been there for who knows how long, but I'd guess the last few had been dead for at least a month before we went in. And this was mid-August, so they had been baking in the summer heat. What do we do, you ask? We went back outside, grabbed bandanas or extra shirts to tie around our faces, layered up on gloves, then got some snow shovels and garbage bags and got to work. It probably took at least 3 hours to get them all out, and most of them just broke apart when we scooped them up. I must have puked 10 or 15 times in those 3 hours. It was the nastiest shit ever. I work as a handyman, and one day I got a call to fix a blocked sink at a lady's house. Seemed routine until she opened the door. The inside of her home looked like something straight out of Dolores Umbridge's office. Every wall, shelf, and flat surface was absolutely covered in decorative plates, porcelain figurines, vintage teapots, and who knows what else. It was like a museum of delicate knickknacks, and I was the bull about to walk through it. The hallway was exactly the width of me and my toolbox, with narrow paths between shelves, side tables, and fragile collectibles. I walked through that place like I was defusing a bomb. Slow, careful steps, barely breathing, terrified of knocking something over. To her credit, the lady was friendly and even offered me tea. But even turning around to take the cup felt like maneuvering a forklift in a glass shop. Every move had to be calculated. I fixed the sink without breaking anything, but that job had my nerves more rattled than crawling under a house or rewiring a panel. I used to install and service alarm systems, and one day I was sent out on what was supposed to be a routine service call. The moment I stepped inside, I realized I was in for it. The place was filthy. I silently thanked whatever higher power convinced me to wear plastic booties, because the carpet was disgusting. I was led to the alarm panel, which wasn't powering on. When I pulled the cover off the wall to investigate, that's when the nightmare started. An army of cockroaches came pouring out of the panel and the wall cavity behind it. Dozens of them, maybe more, scurrying in every direction. After recovering from the initial wave of horror, I took a closer look and found the cause of the issue. Several roaches had crawled onto the circuit board and electrocuted themselves, shorting out the panel. That was the day I learned some alarm panels die not from wear and tear, but from roach-induced electrical failure. I work as a maintenance technician in a community with over 500 units. After 7 years on the job, I've seen just about everything. From apartments completely infested with roaches to units stacked floor to ceiling with old newspapers and hoarded items. But there's one unit I'll never forget. After Hurricane Florence, I was doing routine damage checks, and I stopped by the home of a resident who clearly struggled with serious mental health issues. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with an overwhelming stench, pure sewage. I asked if she was having any issues with her toilet. She looked at me and said, "I don't know." So I told her I'd check it out. When I stepped into the bathroom, I was stunned. The toilet was completely full, waste was piled above the rim. I asked her how long it had been like that, and she simply replied, "I don't flush it, that's how the devil gets into my house." It was one of the most difficult and heartbreaking situations I've encountered in this job. Some things stay with you. I once worked with a hoarder who, strangely enough, lived with a flock of geese inside her house. Yes, actual geese waddling through the rooms, biting her constantly while she spoke to them like they were family. It was bizarre to say the least. She owned a massive home, but had moved into the tiny guest house so she could rent out the main one, though in its current condition, no one in their right mind would. She was a tiny, frail, older woman, clearly a bit scattered mentally. At one point, she left me standing in a hallway packed with towering piles of old newspapers, some topped with random pots and pans. I was surrounded by controlled chaos. As I stood there, I noticed a wall lined with beautiful black and white portraits. I asked her who they were of. "They're of me, dear," she said. And she wasn't kidding. In those photos, she was stunning, an absolute knockout. She had clearly been some kind of actress or model in her younger years. I just stood there, looking from the photos to her, then back again. That's when it hit me, how cruel time can be. How someone can go from glamorous and admired to forgotten, living in clutter and talking to geese that bite her. Right on cue, she yelped as another goose nipped at her leg. Sigh. One of the strangest, saddest moments I've witnessed. I used to work as a mail carrier for the post office. When you're new, you only get your own route one day a week. The rest of the time, you fill in for other carriers who are out sick or on vacation. One day, I was covering for someone who had called in sick. I got to a house that had 4 packages scheduled for delivery. On the front door, there was an old, dusty sign that read, "Please don't knock or ring. Just open the door and leave the packages behind it." Weird, sure, but the sign looked like it had been there forever, so I figured it was just how this household rolled. I opened the door and stepped inside. The house looked totally normal. I bent down to stack the packages neatly behind the door, and as I stood up, boom, there's this older guy, maybe in his 60s or 70s, just standing there. He's wearing skin-tight jeans and an equally tight tank top, rocking a clearly dyed jet black mustache and sipping beer from a can with a straw. Naturally, I was startled, so I said, "Sorry, you scare me. I didn't see you there." He just replied, totally deadpan, "That's because I wasn't here." At this point, I'm trying to stay polite while slowly backing toward the door. I said, "Well, I'm sorry again. I'll be on my way." Then he goes, "Hold up, where's regular carrier's name?" I explained, "She's out sick today, so I'm covering for her, and maybe tomorrow too." And then, without missing a beat, he says, "Nice. Maybe she should stay sick a while. I'll make sure to wear something cute tomorrow." I gave the fakest laugh of my life and got out of there so fast. I've been in a lot of flop houses and rundown buildings over the years. In some of these places, the conditions are absolutely unreal. People using litter boxes as toilets. And yeah, I've stepped in human feces more than once. One time, I walked into a unit where there were 4 or 5 people completely passed out, likely from heroin or some other heavy drug. None of them stirred when I came in, not even a flinch. One guy looked so still, I honestly couldn't tell if he was alive. We ended up calling the cops for a welfare check. It was just one of those moments that hits you, how rough life can really get for some people. Oh Lord, here I go. I used to wash windows for a company a while back, indoors, outdoors, tracks, and screens. We went to this one job where a lady had us clean her house's exterior windows, then sent us to her father-in-law's place just up the road. She let us inside, and there he was, an ancient, grizzled guy sitting at the counter facing the door with a few band-aids, missing the tops of his ears, and a big yellow gauzy bandage on top of his head. I shrugged it off and continued with my work. These were easily some of the dirtiest windows I'd ever cleaned. I went into one room, and the closet was open, packed with rifles, shotguns, and all the accompanying ammo. I think that's an important detail. Back downstairs, I started cleaning the window above the kitchen sink. Every time I'd gone in or out of the house, this guy was always facing the way we came in. My coworker came through, and as I glanced over at him, something else caught my eye. Underneath that yellow gauze pad, there was about an inch of exposed skull between the pad and his skin. His skull was exposed. It was all I could do not to fall off my step stool. It was the color of Aunt Betty's walls after she'd been smoking since she was 12. I have a decent reason to believe this tough old man survived a mauling by some sort of animal. I still don't even know what to think about it. Not exactly weird or disturbing, but this one always stuck with me. I used to deliver pizzas, and one time I went to this elderly couple's house. The lady answered the door wearing a nightgown and only one sock. She took her time getting the money, so I had a moment to look around their place. The only thing they had hanging on their wall was a single 5x7 photo of Abraham Lincoln. That was it. Something about the simplicity of it stayed with me long after. I used to do a lot of in-home catering, delivering platters to all kinds of homes. One day, I showed up with a fruit platter when suddenly a little kid, maybe 3 or 4 years old, bolted right out the front door. He was heading straight down the driveway toward the road. I quickly jogged after him, fruit platter in one hand, and grabbed his arm with the other to gently guide him back inside. When I told his mom what had happened, she just smiled and gave him a light scolding, the kind of you're not supposed to go near the road that parents give without panic. Nope, he had absolutely no clue. A friend of mine works for a cleaning company and often tells me about some of the absolutely horrifying places she's had to clean. But the one story that stuck with me the most was about a 40-year-old obese woman's house. Out of all the homes she'd tackled, this one was by far the worst. The place looked like a full-blown trash dump, clutter piled high everywhere, garbage spilling over, and even a couple of rats roaming freely. But the real nightmare was the bathroom. Feces were everywhere, especially smeared on the toilet lid. My friend said the woman hadn't cleaned the bathroom at all during the entire year she'd been living there. That meant she'd been using a toilet covered in her own waste for over a year. I assumed the woman must have had some mental health issues, but my friend said she seemed perfectly normal during their conversations. So, the only conclusion was that she simply didn't care about hygiene. My brother used to work at a pharmacy that installed special equipment, like hospital-style beds and chairs, for people who couldn't leave their homes. This isn't my story exactly, but a comment reminded me of one he shared. He had to install parts for a hospital-type bed for a woman who was homebound because she was too large to leave her house or function normally outside. Her old bed had broken. The handles she used to move herself were bent out of shape from heavy use. When my brother went to inspect what could be salvaged from the old bed, he had to lie down on the floor to check underneath it. He'd noticed the carpet fell off the entire time, but didn't realize why until that moment. His hand pressed against the carpet and sank into what was once white, but now stained with old urine. He couldn't just leave. He had to finish inspecting the bed before installing the new equipment. When he got home, he spent nearly 30 minutes washing up, trying to get the memory and the smell off him. My mom loves to tell this story about when my dad got out of the army and they moved to his home state of Minnesota. They went to live in this old cabin by the lake that had been built by his grandparents after they immigrated from Finland. The place had a lot of history, but unfortunately, it hadn't been well cared for over the years. Mom said the sealant they put between the wooden logs had pretty much worn away, and she could actually see daylight shining through the gaps. That's when she started putting my playpen up on their big coffee table, because squirrels kept sneaking into the house, climbing right in with me, and stealing my bottles. She wasn't exactly thrilled about sharing her space with those furry little thieves. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.